In June of 1812, Napoleon Bonaparte crossed into Russia with 600,000 soldiers. By December, fewer than 30,000 crawled back. This is not a story about Russian bullets. This is the story of what happens when a commander tells his men to eat the enemy's country, and the country has nothing left to eat. Welcome back to Entree and Tales. I'm Professor Cogsworth, and today we're examining the greatest food supply disaster in military history. Napoleon's 1,812 Russian campaign wasn't lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the stomachs of 500,000 starving men who were told to live off the land and then were left to die in the snow when the land had nothing left to give. By the end of this video, you'll understand why one single order about food destroyed the most powerful army Europe had ever seen. Napoleon's supply system was revolutionary and reckless. Unlike every other European army which hauled massive supply trains of salted meat, hard bread and grain behind them, Napoleon believed in something called foraging. His theory was elegant. The army marches through enemy territory, takes what it needs from farms and villages along the way, and stays light and fast. He literally issued a proclamation telling his soldiers, "The war will feed itself." Now, to be fair, this strategy had worked brilliantly in Italy in 1796, in Austria in 1805, in Prussia in 1806. Rich, densely populated farmland, plenty of food, short campaigns. The army arrived, ate what they found, won the battle, and went home. But Russia in 1812 was different, and Napoleon knew it, or should have. The Grande Armée crossed the Niemen River on June 24, 1812. 600,000 men, the largest field army Europe had ever assembled. And here's where the food story becomes a horror story. Russia was not Italy. The population density was roughly 1/10 of what Napoleon's foraging strategy required. Worse, the Russians employed what we now call a scorched earth policy. As the Russian army retreated east, they burned everything behind them: grain stores, villages, farms, livestock. If the French could eat it, the Russians destroyed it. By the time the French reached Smolensk, 270 miles into Russia, soldiers were already starving. Not because they'd been beaten, because there was simply nothing to forage. The daily bread ration collapsed from the standard 24 ounces to nothing. Men began eating their cavalry horses, the same horses they needed to ride into battle. And then it got worse. On September 14th, Napoleon entered Moscow, the grand prize, the spiritual heart of Russia, and Moscow was empty. The population had fled, the food stores were gone, and then the city burned. Whether the Russians set the fire deliberately or it was accidental is still debated. What's not debated is the result. 80% of Moscow was destroyed. The granaries, the food stores, the shelter, gone in 3 days of fire. Napoleon sat in the ashes of Moscow for 36 days, waiting for the Tsar to surrender. The Tsar never came. Winter was coming. And on October 19th, Napoleon gave the order to retreat. He had marched in with 600,000. He was marching back with roughly 100,000, and the food situation was about to become apocalyptic. And here's where our story becomes food history, because what the Grande Armée ate on the retreat from Moscow is one of the most horrifying survival diets ever recorded. Horse blood. When the cavalry horses died, and they died by the tens of thousands, soldiers drank their blood warm and ate their meat raw. Horse blood became a staple. It was protein, calories, and liquid in one desperate package. Tree bark. Soldiers stripped birch and pine trees, peeling away the inner cambium layer, the soft, slightly nutritious layer between the bark and the wood. It tastes like bitter cardboard. It has almost no calories, but it was something to put in a stomach that was eating itself. Boiled leather, boots, belts, saddles, harnesses. Soldiers boiled leather in snow pots to soften it enough to chew. Leather has almost zero nutritional value, but the act of chewing and swallowing suppressed the pain of hunger, at least for a while. Wax and tallow. Candle wax and the tallow used to waterproof boots were eaten. One survivor described tasting the candles of Moscow, melted down and drunk as a last resort. And here's the detail that breaks my historian's heart. The army had crossed through some of the richest farmland in Europe on the way in. They'd eaten it bare. Now they were marching back through the same land, and it was already stripped. They were starving in a land they had already consumed. And now, the betrayal. Because here's what most history documentaries skip. Napoleon didn't stay with his army. On December 5th, as the remnants of the Grande Armée stumbled through negative 30 degrees Celsius temperatures in what is now Belarus, Napoleon left. He jumped into a sleigh with his chief of staff and raced back to Paris, 1,500 miles in 13 days. He needed to get back before news of the disaster reached France and someone tried to overthrow him. He left Marshal Murat in command. Murat was a brilliant cavalry officer but had no idea how to manage a starving, freezing retreat. Within weeks, he abandoned the army too. The men they left behind were eating horse blood in negative 30-degree cold. They were dying of typhus, lice-borne, spreading through men too weak to wash. They were freezing in their own uniforms, which had become rags. Some survivors described men sitting down in the snow to rest and simply never standing up again. The French army had entered Russia with 600,000 men. The final count of soldiers who made it back across the Niemen? Estimates vary, but most historians agree fewer than 30,000. That's a 95% casualty rate, and more men died from starvation, cold, and disease than from every battle combined. So what does the food historian take from this? Napoleon's live off the land order wasn't just a tactical mistake. It was a fundamental misunderstanding of what food supply means in warfare. He had built a system that worked only when three conditions were met: dense population, rich agriculture, and short campaign duration. Russia violated all three. And Napoleon knew Russia was different. He just believed his own legend so completely that he assumed his foraging system was unbreakable. The real betrayal isn't that Napoleon left his men in the snow. It's that he gave them an order: the war will feed itself. That was a death sentence disguised as a strategy. He told them to eat the land. And when the land had nothing left, he wasn't there to answer for it. If you enjoyed this journey through the darker side of food history, join me next week. We'll be exploring what the Russian soldiers actually ate during that same campaign. Hint: it involved a lot of fermented things that kept them alive when French rations killed. Subscribe to Entree and Tales, ring the bell, and leave a comment below. If you were a soldier in 1812, what's the one food you'd want in your pack? I read every one. Until next time, I'm Professor Cogsworth, and every meal has a tale.